Hey guys, Kevin and I flew up to Illinois to go to HPL's manufacturing facility to learn about racing motor oil. So we're gonna go inside and see what's up.
Hi guys. Hello. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thanks for coming.
We're here at the manufacturing facility and Harry's going to give us a quick background on how this brand came to be and a little bit about himself.
Thanks, Jay. Well, for those who don't know, I started Precision Turbo and Engine back in 1993. And for those who have followed our product line would know that I am a very perfectionist kind of guy, and I'm always trying to upgrade our products. And after over 25 years at looking at failed hardware, working with racing engine guys out there in the field and racing my own products, it was always clear to me that people needed to know more about oil, including myself. And the synergy with HPL oil and racers and performance nuts in general is that everyone's looking for a better product. And the HPL really ties into racing. And the coolest thing about this product is that there's no limit at what we can do. We can change our formulas for customers overnight if needed. But we've really refined it down that we don't need to do that these days, but it's really solved and been a problem solver for many, many customers. Not only in how long the oil will last, but also about anti-foaming, also about the heavy duty requirements or the work that oil has to do within the engine and all the things that go into racing where we're always wanting the best oils.
Harry, why don't you show us around?
I'd love to, but a better guy to do that would be David. He's a plant manager here. He's much better versed in this than I am. So David, it's all yours.
Well, welcome to our facility here in Manteno, Illinois. I'll give you a brief summary of our manufacturing process here. It all starts when the tanker comes in the door. We bring the tankers in and we critique the product that's inside of it by taking a sample from the top of the tanker, the bottom of the tanker, and taking it into our QC lab for them to scrutinize and then approve. Once the material is approved, we offload it into our large bulk storage tanks, which we have 15,000 gallons worth of storage capacity in our tanks. And then from there, we go on to the blending process.
So it looks like you have a lot of capacity and it's all inside the building?
Yes, that's correct. Over here we have 10,000 gallon storage tanks that are stored at room temperature for all of our base oils. And then over on this side of the plant, we have 5 heated tanks where we can heat really thick, viscous materials to about 140 degrees so we can pump it around the plant and use it.
Right on. So these big things on the side, these are just basically heating elements?
Yeah, so we have tankless boilers and there are 2-inch stainless steel pipe coils inside there.
Okay.
To keep the tanks warm.
These tanks here, they're on load cells?
Yeah, so those are our blend tanks. We do all of our blending on load cells in the blend tanks. 1/10 of a pound precision on a 1,000 gallon.
Oh wow.
1,000 gallon.
And what's the importance of knowing the weight of the tank?
Well, the weight of the material in the tank is for high precision blending. If you blend by volume, you have to consider the density and it'll change with temperature. With weight, it stays the same.
Stays the same.
So no matter what we blend, whether it's the hot viscous material or the room temperature base oil, 10 pounds is 10 pounds, regardless of what the temperature is.
So a lot of consistency.
Very consistent, it makes a very consistent blend, and we're hitting very consistent viscosity grades every single time, so you get the same product every time.
So if I buy a quart of oil this year versus a quart of oil last year, I'm getting the same thing in that bottle, like
correct.
Control.
And that's how we can control that, is with the very precise weighing of the material as it goes into the vessel.
Okay. And then it looks like the other side of the facility is like inventory storage, more or less?
Correct. Yeah, we have multiple ways of inventorying stuff. We inventory our raw materials. Then we also do a lot of blending, store finished blends in bulk totes so that we can fill it to your customer's size, whether it's a quart, a pail, a drum, or a tote.
Okay.
We can fill it on demand in our filling area.
How much of the stuff that's in these blend tanks makes it into the lab? Does every one of these blend tanks get checked in the lab on a regular basis?
Correct. So every bulk material gets checked, every additive gets checked when we bring them in, and then once we blend them together, all the blends get checked in the lab every single time.
Okay. Can we go into the lab and take a look?
Absolutely. Let's go.
All right. Can you give me a quick overview of what's happening in here?
Absolutely. This is our QC and R&D lab. This is where we test all the oils. So we test everything that comes in from our raw material supplier, and then we also test everything that we make out in the plant to make sure that it's on spec and meets the performance requirements that you guys need.
So if you guys are bringing in raw material, you're mixing, you're bottling, the lab is here, but you have a really good handle on the base product and finished product through this place?
That's correct.
And how often are the chemists in here interacting with the product out there?
Every day. Everything we make, the chemists, our lab folks look at. So, and every product we bring into the building, our lab is looking at. We have everything in this room to be able to measure all the physical properties of all the oils we make.
What machine in here is the coolest piece you got, in your opinion?
I believe the ICP is probably the coolest piece we have. We're able to look at elemental levels by the parts per billion on just about any element on the periodic table.
Billion?
Parts per billion.
Wow.
We actually dilute the samples by 10, so we get a result in parts per million.
And how much better do you think motor oil is today with this technology than it was 20 years ago?
Oh, it's way better. We have better base oils, better additives, and we have a lot more instrumentation today than we would have had 20 years ago.
In terms of base oils, how far does a product end up as a finished product versus where it starts off? Can you make a really great product out of a poor product with an additive package, or you have to have a strong base to start off?
Exactly. You need a good foundation to make a fantastic oil. Everything matters. The base oil has to be really good. The additives have to be top of the line to make a very good product, and that's kind of where we start.
So now we're here in the lab at HPL, and this is one of 6 books that is published every year that basically they operate this lab as a standard. So there's way too much information for me to begin to learn, let alone try to teach someone else. So we're just going to give kind of a crash course. So these 2 machines are critically important to the process, and this measures the viscosity of the oil. So they'll pour a sample as it comes into the plant and measure the viscosity, and then when the oil's all done and ready to be bottled, it'll be measured again. It's done in lots, and they test the oil from 40C to 100C. That way they know that oil is going to be able to perform both cold and hot, because you don't want an oil that would perform only good at one temperature, because then the engine will suffer because it doesn't operate at one temperature. And then this machine has a crystal that basically they'll put a drop of oil on the crystal, and then it will give a signature of what that chemical makeup is like and whether or not there are any impurities or anything that they need to be aware of. So this is not only a place where they can have a high level of quality control on the products coming in and out of the building, but they can also help diagnose problems for customers in other places of industry. So the next machine is a cold cranking simulator. So they take an oil sample, put it in a little jar, it gets sucked up into a machine, and then it sits in a container that has a paddle, and basically that paddle kind of works like a hub dyno. The paddle is turned by a motor, and however much force it takes to turn that paddle in that oil is measured by this machine, and it simulates moving the oil at a cold start. So whether you're in northern Canada or in sunny Florida, it's a cold start either way. The oil's not being pushed through the engine yet, and it has to be forced through the engine, and that requires a certain amount of torque. Each viscosity of the oil is going to require a different amount of torque to start moving that oil through the engine to protect the engine during startup. There are some neat measures that have been taken with engines that are auto start stop. So modern cars that have auto start stop, they've had to move to a different style rod bearing to protect that engine, because instead of it starting up once in a drive cycle, it may get shut off at every red light. So you have this accumulation of engine startup, which arguably is one of the most damaging times, because the engine isn't protected by the oil, because the oil is just sitting in the engine. This machine is going to measure at different temperatures. So if you had a good illustration would be like moving maple syrup when it's cold versus stirring hot tea. Very different amount of force with a spoon to move it, and that's what this machine's doing, so they can quantify how different weight oils react at different temperatures. The next machine is this high temperature, high shear capillary viscometer. It's a mouthful. Basically what they're simulating is a high temperature, high pressure situation, and whether or not the oil can stay in place and not be sheared away. So if you think about the oil that's in the oil pan of your engine, is living a different role in the pan than it is, say, on the surface of the crankshaft and rod bearing during the power stroke. So during the power stroke, you have all that combustion force coming down the connecting rod, pushing down on the crankshaft to rotate the crank. Well, the oil that is on that surface there is exposed to a lot of pressure and a lot of temperature as it's moving that friction away and trying to keep those parts from touching, and it's subject to shear. And shear would be just as it sounds, when the oil's going to be mechanically displaced and not able to do its job. So this machine simulates that process that goes on inside of your engine during the power stroke. So this next machine is pretty important to those of us that have turbochargers. If you look back over the last, say, 40 years, the OEMs have tried to come out with a strong force of turbocharged OEM cars, and in the 80s they really lost due to the oil wasn't there to support the turbochargers, and a lot of OEMs had turbocharge failure, and turbocharging from an OEM level went away for a period of time. And a lot of that was just because the oil, what the oil goes through inside the turbocharger is a lot different than what the oil goes through in the engine, and the temperatures that the oil is subjected to can basically overheat the oil. So this machine takes the oil on almost a 2-hour journey of abuse to see how the oil will be able to stay together and not just cook into some crusty substance that then the turbocharger blows up. While the OEMs have gone through great lengths to create very reliable platforms that don't have to go in for warranty repair, us in the aftermarket, we spend a lot of time just turbocharging cars and don't consider what that turbocharger has to live with. So, you know, turbochargers are pretty neat devices. If they're assembled correctly, they live very long lives, and when you don't have good oil in them, they don't live a very long life. So if you're dealing with a friend or a personal failure where the turbocharger is breaking, you could ignorantly blame the turbocharger, or you can start to look at the oil, because in front of us here is a new test stick, a test stick that the oil survived the test, and a test stick that the oil failed the test. For those of you that are heavy into the sound of anti-lag or two-step competitions and things like that, you can see the outside of the turbocharger starting to glow and overheat. Imagine what that's doing inside the turbocharger. And the next step to ponder is that turbocharger is oil lubricated and oil cooled a lot of times, and because a lot of us aren't using dry sumps and we're fighting crankcase pressure, some of you may even be restricting the oil to the turbocharger, which then it plays even more critical role in keeping that turbocharger alive. So if you're dealing with a premium turbocharger, you've got a couple $1,000s into it, and you're using low-cost do-it-yourself motor oil, these are the risks you're taking, because if that oil is not formulated to stand up to the abuse that's happening inside the turbocharger, you're going to experience failures, and the failures are way more money than just buying the right oil. So behind me is a machine that the staff is really proud of. It's an ICPOES. Basically what it's going to do is it takes the oil and it aerosolizes it, and then it vaporizes it over a 6000 C plasma flame and takes a photograph of the waveforms that each of the chemicals produce. So it's a pretty high level device on taking that oil apart and understanding exactly what's in it on an atomic level. So whereas the machine that we saw earlier with the crystals is more of how things are bonded together, this is more of an exploded view of everything that's going on. If you've sent oil off to a lab like Blackstone or another third party that takes a look at the oil and sees what particulate may be getting into the oil or what the oil makeup is like, this is the same type of machine. Now, because of the quality control here, they don't take in oil samples. They're only testing their own products as they move through the manufacturing process to ensure the highest quality. But it's the same type of process to understand everything that's inside of that liquid form once it's broken down to a atomic level. At this station, they're simulating how oil can foam in the engine. Basically, you have a bunch of reciprocating parts in the engine. The oil is pressurized, there's crankcase pressure, and it can turn into kind of a frappuccino of sorts inside the engine. If you're trying to pump foam through the engine, it won't have the film strength to keep the metal parts from touching, and you'll have damage occurring. So basically, they aerate the oil here, and they work on the surface tension of the different chemicals and try to get them to basically fall back in line. So when they're foaming, they're separating, they get aerated, and through their chemistry, they work on getting the oil to stay oil instead of becoming foamed and staying foamed. And the standard that this oil is held to is much different than the standard for a regular passenger car, because the regular passenger car can deal with a certain amount of problems because it doesn't have as much load and force going on inside the engine. So you've increased the RPM, you've increased the power output, and then you've got this frappuccino of oil flowing through the engine and nothing's being lubricated that well. Friction goes up, metal parts touch, and now you've got a destroyed engine. So through this work, they work on keeping the HPL line from having a foaming problem. And if it does aerate at all, it goes back into a liquid state very quickly. So this next station is all about corrosion. So they have a standard in which copper will corrode, and everything here is done to a high level. So they're talking about not going past 1B in the corrosion on copper. And they have these little steel sticks that they also subject to their oil mixture, and whether it be fresh water or salt water, to see how quickly that will corrode. And I think this is the single biggest eye-opener for me, because from what I've learned today, if you have this recipe for oil, and there's a quart of oil and in it is a bunch of stuff, changing one thing, a small percentage, if you were fighting a problem with an additive to keep friction at bay, you may get that friction problem to be solved and go away and create a massive corrosion problem on the other hand. And that is something that I really didn't understand before coming here today, is that the complexity of the chemistry and what goes into a finished product, and how one small change on one end can create a large change on the other. And I think the best way to kind of equate it to us as drag racers anyway is, it's very easy to get a basic oil. So, you could consider a basic oil to be a 13-second quarter-mile pass, and that's a basic oil, and it does a basic job. But the faster you go, the more everything has to be in tune, and the more everything has to be right to be successful in it. And as you fine-tune your program, a small change on one end can create problems on the other. And a company like this isn't looking for a personal best per se. They're looking to make a killer product that has great repeatability, and that the consumers of that product can rely on to add longevity to their engine programs, because none of this is inexpensive for us to do, and our engines get very expensive. And to come to a lab like this and to learn about all the different things that go into a quart of oil, it surely changes my perspective about walking up to a shelf and just grabbing a quart based off of price or packaging.
This section looks pretty cool. This is the fill lineup?
That's correct. This is the last part of the process, where after it's been approved in our lab, blended in our facility and approved, we come to the bottling section and we can bottle it into quarts. Part of our flexibility here is that we're able to package a wide variety of products very quickly. This filling line will do a case of 12 quarts every 30 seconds.
Wow.
We'll label it, fill it, and cap it, and then we'll box it up and send it on its way.
That's awesome, man. Getting everything down from labeling, smooth and organized and clean too.
Yep,
really.
all in the same building.
Now that you saw the HPL plant, everything being made, oil from the beginning, getting tested, getting manufactured, getting bottled, getting labeled, getting shipped out. It's an amazing process here, and it was my first time experiencing something like this, and I learned a lot. Jay, what do you think?
Very, very neat experience. There's a tremendous amount that goes into these products, and the fact that there's some things going on that they're continuing to further, and these people are still excited about building better oil and building better lubricants, which, when you think about the abuse that these engines go through, especially in the turbocharged realm or force inducted realm, where the engines are really being pushed hard, it's good to know that you have access to a product that there's a lot of integrity behind the brand, and there's a lot of people that are just trying to be the best at what they do.
Now, I'm gonna go home, do an oil change, add some HPL. Let's go.
Let's go.